Hey there, and welcome to Antifragile Faith, where we practice Christian mindfulness by taking a little time each day to train our minds by focusing on our breath, checking our hearts, and turning to God, training ourselves to become more familiar with His presence and voice. Today, I want to talk about the second step, if you will, in this process that we are training our minds to go through. This idea of self-assessment, and you'll hear me call it different things at different times. Checking your heart, quieting your heart, noting your heart, checking in on how you're doing, you get the idea. This general idea of becoming self-aware, of training this self-awareness. Just noting whether your heart is quiet, peaceful, happy, sad, impatient, anxious, angry, frustrated, or just scattered and busy all over the place. The important point is becoming self-aware of where your heart's at and how you're doing, and wherever it's at, bringing that to God. Not judging or getting happy about being happy or getting frustrated about being frustrated, but assessing where you're at and bringing that to God, which is exactly why that's the next step. Turning to God and giving that all to Him. Some days you might feel like you're in a more conducive place to hear God, to listen to Him, to maybe even receive something from Him. And other days you might wonder, what's the point? I'm so scattered and frustrated, there's no way I could possibly hear or sense God. But neither of those is the point. They miss the point. Becoming self-aware, recognizing whatever it is, and bringing that to God. And in that, no matter what state we're in, training ourselves to recognize Him everywhere, no matter what state we're in. So that wherever we find ourselves, whatever situations or circumstances, whatever state we're in, we can offer that to Him and invite Him into it, letting Him work in us, with us, and through us. So with that in mind, let's begin again today. As always, let's start by taking a few deep breaths. Really feeling the air just fill your lungs. And on the next out breath, gently closing your eyes and allowing your breath to return to its natural rhythm. Letting your focus rest on the breath, anchoring ourselves here. Again, not controlling the breath in any way, but just following it with our attention, becoming aware of it. And after you've been here for a few moments, naturally, letting your attention shift to your heart, looking inside, becoming aware of how you're doing, where you're at. Take a few moments to do this, particularly if you're not used to doing this, or if this is a new idea of just regularly, very intentionally, non-judgmentally, checking in, just assessing how you're doing. And be honest with yourself. That's key here. And now, turning to God. Whatever you have, giving it to Him, recognizing that He is here. In whatever state you're in, you can bring that to Him. He wants to receive that from you. Consciously recognizing that God is here. God is present. If you find yourself drifting off, your thoughts scattering, run yourself through the routine. Come back to the breath, anchor yourself there, check how you're doing, note how you're doing, and turn to God, bringing that to Him, offering that to Him, surrendering that to Him. If you're finding any of these particular steps a struggle, lean into that particular step and just stick with that one. Practice that one. If it's the breath, you're having trouble anchoring on that and even just focusing on your breath and leaning into that, stay with that for a while. Noting can often help with this. Mentally noting 1 on the in-breath, 2 on the out-breath, 3 on the next in-breath, 4 on the next out-breath, and so on until you get to 10, and then starting over. And just training a much more relaxed attention. Not this narrowed and focused attention, but a much more relaxed awareness of your breath so that it actually can anchor you throughout the rest of this practice. If perhaps I'm moving too quickly through the self-awareness piece, and you're kind of struggling with where you're at, you can't really get a read or a good gauge on it, or maybe it's a couple of different things. That's perfectly fine. That's totally natural. Becoming aware of that itself is actually a good first step, that you need more time to assess where you're at. So take that time. Really lean into getting a gauge on where you're at. You can argue that actually this is the most important step, becoming more self-aware. It's difficult to give something to God if you're not aware you have it in the first place, whether it's a good thing or a struggle that you want to surrender and offer up and get rid of. And if you're really struggling with this part, asking for grace to become more self-aware, to just get a gauge on where you're at and how you're doing, and if anything's blocking that. If you're struggling with then turning to God and offering that to Him, maybe it's a little too vague or just seems too open-ended. Well, that's part of coming to recognize Him. We don't have the same tangible reminders, the same tangible things we can mentally hook onto, like we do with friends or any sort of conversation that's happening right in front of us. But He actually is more real. He is the basis for all of reality. Everything exists because of Him. He is being. God is. And so we need to train ourselves to learn to recognize that, because it's a different sense than what we're normally used to. But He is more real than anything we know. But sometimes that takes training to recognize that. Training our minds, training our hearts. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So leaning into that, becoming comfortable with maybe not really quite recognizing Him yet. And as we come to a close today, just letting your attention come back to your breath, resting on that momentarily. Before you transition into the rest of your day, just noting how today went, in a similar way of checking your heart, not in any sort of judgmental or measurement way. Just noting how you did, noting where you're at, and whether you were able to recognize God. Again, remembering that this will take a lot of time, practice, and patience. This is a long-term game. And so I hope to see you tomorrow.